I'm 41, and I thought I knew every single thing about my husband after 15 years together. I thought we'd weathered it all. Job losses, family drama, even that brutal year his mother lived with us and criticized the way I folded laundry. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last month. It started the night of our anniversary. We don't usually make a big deal of it, but he'd booked a surprise dinner at a little Italian place downtown. The kind of place where the tables are so close together you can hear the couple next to you arguing about whose turn it is to take the dog out. I remember thinking it was sweet, thoughtful, because lately he's been so buried in work that we hardly talk. Dinner was nice. Almost too nice. He was chatty, smiling, really engaged. He even ordered a bottle of wine, which is unusual because he almost never drinks. Then, right as we were finishing dessert, he handed me a small, wrapped box. I assumed it was jewelry, but when I opened it, I found a set of old-fashioned brass keys. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of inside joke, but he just watched me, smiling faintly, and said, "You'll understand." That was it. No explanation. I tried to push, but he wouldn't say more. When we got home, he keys in my nightstand and kissed me good like nothing. I told myself I'd ask again but when I woke up, he was already gone. That night, I noticed something. His laptop, usually glued to him, was left on the kitchen counter, open. The screen showed a paused video from what looked like a dimly, and there, in the corner was a door. A door keys flashed and I couldn't stop thinking. It wasn't our house. Our hallway doesn't have that dark wood or those strange patterned tiles, and the door, it had a heavy black frame, the kind you'd see in some old industrial, not in a home. I didn't touch his laptop that night, but I made a mental note. The next day, I waited until he went to shower before I accidentally opened the lid again. The feed was gone. In its place was a blank desktop with no recent files. Either he'd closed it himself, or the system was set to lock down automatically. When I asked him casually what the keys were for, he gave me this slow smile and said, "Patience. You'll find out soon enough." His tone was playful, but something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten, like it wasn't just a surprise, like it was a test. That weekend, he left early Saturday morning to meet a client, and didn't come back until after midnight. Normally, I'd believe him. His job does sometimes keep him out late. But this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd spent the day somewhere those keys belonged. At one point in the afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It just said, "Don't go there." No name, no context. I almost brushed it off as a wrong number, until I noticed the wallpaper in the attached image. It was the same patterned tile from that hallway in the video feed. I didn't reply to the message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard more than once, but something told me not to engage. Whoever sent it clearly knew I had the keys, and worse, they knew I might try to use them. By Sunday night, curiosity had twisted into obsession. I waited until my husband was in the shower again and opened the nightstand. The keys were there, but now I noticed something I hadn't before. Tiny, hand-engraved numbers on each one. Not room number, but something more cryptic. The first key had B3 scratched into the metal. I took a quick picture of all of them, just in case. The following Friday, I told him I was going to meet a friend for coffee. Instead, I used his car, because if these keys led to something far away, my own license plate might give me too easily. I scrolled through his GPS history while sitting in the driveway, pretending to adjust the seat. One location kept popping up in the logs, an old warehouse district on the edge of town. When I pulled up, it was exactly what you'd expect. Abandoned-looking buildings, graffiti, a few boarded-up windows, but one building stood out. Its exterior looked almost maintained. New locks on the side door, fresh paint around the frame, and right above that door, in faded metal letters, B3. I sat in the car for a solid 5 minutes just staring at that B3 sign. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, but my hands were already tightening around the keys in The side door was heavy, the kind you have to lean your weight into. The first key slid in with a soft metallic click, and when I turned it, the lock gave easily, like it had been opened 1,000 times before. The hallway inside was dim, lit only by a few overhead bulbs that flickered. They were struggling to stay alive. The smell hit me next. Not mildew or dust, like I'd expected, but something faintly sweet, chemical. It made the back of my throat itch. There were doors along the hallway, all painted the same dull gray. Some had numbers, others were blank. The air felt still, almost too still, like the whole place was holding its breath. At the end of the hall, a light spilled from one open doorway. My shoes echoed on the concrete floor as I walked toward it, the sound far louder than it should have been. When I stepped inside, I froze. The room was bare, except for a single table in the center. On it, neatly arranged, were photographs, dozens of them, each one showing me at the grocery store, walking the dog, standing at my office window. Some were taken from a distance, others close enough to see the stitching on my coat. In the middle of the table, on top of all, was a new one, a picture of me standing outside taken less than 10 minutes ago. For a second, my brain couldn't process it. The photo was still warm to the touch, the edges curling slightly like it had just rolled out of a printer. My pulse was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I caught it, the faint sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. I scanned the room for another exit. but there was only the doorway I'd come through. The footsteps grew louder, and then I heard the faint squeak of a shoe pivoting on concrete, like whoever it was had just turned the corner into the hallway. I grabbed the stack of photographs without thinking, shoving them into my tote bag. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped them. Peering out into the hall, I saw the edge of a shadow stretching toward me, long, thin, moving at an unhurried pace. Whoever it was knew I was here. I bolted. The hallway seemed longer now, the light weaker. Every step felt like it echoed through the entire building. I didn't look back until I was shoving open the heavy side door and stumbling into the daylight. That's when I saw it. Parked 2 spaces down from my car was my husband's SUV. I didn't get in my car right away. Instead, I ducked behind the corner of the building, my breath still jagged from running. A minute later, the side door swung open, and there he was, my husband, walking out like he'd just finished a casual. No rush, no sign he'd been chasing any. He didn't even glance toward my car. Instead, he locked the door, pulled out his phone, and started to. Then he got into the SUV. My first instinct was to follow. I stayed several cars back, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. He drove across town, not toward home, but toward a part of the city we almost never. An old row of brownstone apartments near the river. He parked outside one with faded green shutters, glanced around once, then went inside. He had a key. I waited. 10 minutes passed. 15. At 20, I was ready to give up, but then the front door opened again. Not with him, but with a woman I'd never seen before. She was in her 30s, pretty, dressed casually, and carrying a grocery bag. She looked down the street both ways before locking the door behind her and walking off in the opposite direction. A moment later, my husband appeared at the window upstairs. He was talking on his phone, smiling. The same smile he'd given me when he handed me those keys. I didn't sleep that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him in that upstairs window, smiling like none of this was wrong. By morning, the keys in my nightstand felt heavier, like they were daring me to try the rest. I laid them out on the bed. There were 5 in total. I'd already used B3. The next was stamped A1. I pulled up the photo I'd taken of them and zoomed in, looking for patterns. The letters and numbers didn't match any addresses I knew, but they felt organized, like sections in a larger building. By noon, I was back in the warehouse district. The A1 door was 2 buildings over from B3. Same heavy black frame, same fresh locks. Inside, it was colder. The air smelled faintly of bleach. There was no hallway this time, just one large open space filled with rows of metal shelving. Each shelf held identical black binders, each with a date on the spine. I pulled one at random. Inside were pages of typed notes, each section labeled with a name, and there, halfway through, was mine. My entire life laid out in bullet points. Where I went, what I wore, who I spoke to, even times I was alone in my own house. One note stopped me cold. Subject appears unaware of monitoring. Anticipated change, within the month. And just below it, dated 2 weeks ago. Keys delivered. Phase 2 initiated. I shoved the binder back onto the shelf and scanned the rest. Different names. Some I didn't recognize. Others I did. People from our neighborhood. A co-worker I hadn't spoken to in months. Even the woman I'd seen leaving the brownstone the day before. Every binder had that same structure. Observation notes, photos, patterns of movement, and always that final line. Anticipated change. The dates varied, but mine was the most recent. My hands were sweating so badly I could barely grip the next key. C2. I didn't want to try it, but at the same time, I couldn't stop. The C2 door was at the far end of the block, tucked into a corner where the street lamps didn't quite reach. Inside was a single small room. No shelves, no tables, just a metal chair bolted to the floor and a camera mounted in the corner. The lens pointed straight at the chair, a red recording light glowing steady. I backed out slowly, locking the door behind me like it might erase the image from my head. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. All the keys, no matter the number, had the same faint engraving on the shaft. Property of Haven Solution. I'd never heard of it, but something about the name vague was meant to sound. Back in my car, I searched it. Nothing. No business listing, no website. Just one old news article 12 years ago at a private security firm that had been investigated for illegal surveillance before abruptly. The CE, my husband. I waited until I didn't bother pretending I was calm. My hands were shaking as I dropped the keys onto the. They clattered loud enough. He stared at just that same faint smile. I told him I'd NC2. I told him about the photographs, the binders, the chair, about Haven Solution. I waited for him to at least try to explain it away. Instead, he sighed, almost like I'd just saved him the trouble of telling me. He said I wasn't supposed to find out this way, that the anticipated change in my file referred to me joining them, that he'd been preparing me for months. I asked him what them meant exactly. His answer chilled me. He said it was a network, people who tracked, documented, and sometimes corrected lives of others, sometimes for clients, sometimes for their own purposes. He claimed it wasn't malicious, just necessary, and apparently I had a skill set they. When I demanded to know why my life had been under a microscope for years, he said it was the only way to make she a fit. that giving me the keys was his way of inviting me in, and then he said the part that made my stomach turn. If I refused, they wouldn't just let me walk away. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me like the air had been sucked out of the room. He wasn't threatening me in anger. He was stating it like a fact, a rule, something that had already been decided long before tonight. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I forced my expression into something neutral, even curious. I asked him what joining would involve. He relaxed at that, started talking in that low, measured tone he uses when he thinks he's teaching me something important. He said the first step would be training their primary location, that one of the remaining keys would get me in, that the files I'd seen were entry-level exposure. There was much more I hadn't touched. I nodded slowly, pretending to take it. All the while my mind was racing. If I played along, if I ran now, I'd be leaving without knowing how far their reach went, or how many eyes were already. That night, I waited until he was asleep, then pulled the stack of photos from. I laid them out on the photographing every single one with my phone. Then I did the same with the notes I'd grabbed from the binder. Every shred of proof I had, backed up to a cloud account he didn't know existed. By dawn, I had a plan. I'd accept his invitation, but on my terms. Use the next key, learn exactly who they were and how they operated, and then, when I had enough, burn it all down from the inside. When he woke up, I handed him the keys and said, "Tell me when to start." He smiled, proud, almost relieved. But inside, I wasn't agreeing. I was agreeing to end them.